And so, my dear friends, before tonight's video begins, just a quick shout out for the Chilling app. April 22nd will mark the 1 year point since the Chilling app was officially launched. So I'm here to tell you about the Chilling 1 year anniversary giveaway. This includes a Samsung 70-inch Class 7 Series LED 4K UHD Smart TV, the Samsung 4.1 channel soundbar, and the limited edition Year 1 t-shirt. And of course, 2 first place runners-up will receive a $100 gift card to Amazon and a limited edition Chilling Year 1 t-shirt. And 5 second place runners-up will receive a $25 gift card to Amazon and that limited edition Chilling Year 1 t-shirt. The winner, of course, will be announced on or about May the 2nd, and you will find details at the link in the video description below. Also, that's where you need to go to enter. And of course, let me just remind you of some of the incredible features of the Chilling app. There are now classic novels, vintage horror radio, and true crime. And of course there's the first of its kind ambient menu, so you can choose whether you listen to the stories in the pouring rain, or whatever takes your fancy. Now of course you have the ability to download for offline listening. We now have well over 800 stories, and that means hundreds of hours of content. From monsters, gore, to the paranormal, from thrillers to true stories. Of course, there's a wonderful sleep timer, so you can set it and drift off into those wonderful, wonderful nightmares. You get a free trial, don't forget that. And from then on, it's only $2.99 per month. And of course, the best thing is completely ad-free. So, check out the link in the video description below, and join me and many other wonderful narrators at the Chilling app. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I went camping in the Glasshouse Mountains. I should have stayed home. Greetings. I'm not very good at this kind of thing, and would not by any stretch of the imagination consider myself an author. But I will try to do my best to relay what happened 8 years ago, up in the Glasshouse Mountains of Queensland, Australia. My name is Cal, and I'm a 29-year-old outdoor enthusiast. Anything that can get me face first into nature is exactly what I want to do with my free time. So, it all began when a friend of mine, his name is Detra, invited me on a camping trip up into the Glasshouse Mountains as a birthday getaway. It was a thoughtful and generous act of kindness that I simply could not refuse. Oh, what could be better than a birthday away from all the noise of overpopulation of humans, and to take in that fresh air, the beautiful sights, and spend some quality time with my best friend. So, how many times have you been up there? I started climbing out of the passenger seat of Detra's car. Only a handful of times. Even on those few trips, it was more of a hike. Well, I've helped out here with school groups as a basic survival guide, but never really had a chance to camp out and take it all in without all the kids around, so technically, first for me as well. He gave me a slight smile and a shoulder bump. All right, all right. I sighed out each word. Yeah, that's the spirit. We have a long walk ahead of us, brother, Detra stated with a wide and mocking smirk. We hiked for hours, seeing a few rainbow lorikeets, a handful of roos, and even saw some tracks that I firmly believe belonged to some dingoes. Upon reaching the location that Detra had designated as the camping spot, well, it was beautiful. Trees forming a ring around this mostly open space, and on all sides was dense brush and forest. Well, I have to give it to you. This turned out far more gorgeous than I'd expected. Not that I doubted you, of course. Well, more that I, just remembered this mountain from the hikes while in school. Always seemed so bland and basic. But I guess I just had to know where to go, I said, whilst pulling out my phone to snap a few shots. Really? You're using your phone? Oh. Didn't you get given a pretty sweet camera just last year? He stated, as if I'd just committed a crime. Well, look, as far as I'm concerned, I paid a lot of money for this phone. Plus, its camera is better than most cameras within a normal person's price range. So yeah, I'll stick with this. Takes super clear shots anyway, I stated sarcastically. Okay, whatever, man, he said while smiling and scanning the clearing. Well, I'm just glad you agreed to come at all, man. He started towards the middle of the clearing, shifting the bags on his back to gain access to the tent bag. I followed not too far behind, taking pictures as I went. As we reached the center, we both dropped our bags, and he unzipped the large bag containing his tent. I, however, was still too taken away by the raw beauty that Mother Nature had provided. It had been so long since I'd been able to get out into nature like this. Couldn't believe I was so reluctant, but being out there made me remember why I loved it so much. Detra was about halfway through putting up his tent. Meanwhile, I was messing with the setting on my phone to optimize my pictures. And in the process, I ended up noticing something that took me off guard. I was messing around with the zoom setting, surprised that the phone could go up to 50 times zoom. Well, doing so without losing too much quality. However, taking a stable shot seemed near impossible at that level, as the slightest twitch would send everything out of frame. However, as I played with it, testing it on the trees on the far side of the clearing, my breath caught in my throat, as on the screen I could see a tree. But beside that tree, it looked like something was peering out from behind it. But the quality and my inability to keep it stable made it impossible to make out what it was or who it was. Man, I think there's someone over there on the far side of the tree line, I said over my shoulder, not taking my eyes off the general area where the camera had revealed something. Come on, man, I get it. People bum you out, but there are bound to be others up here looking for a spot. Probably just some guy who wanted this spot and found it was occupied. Don't worry so much, he said with a soft laugh while looking over at me with a raised eyebrow. I had to admit it did sound very plausible. I was probably just overreacting. Plus, it was a large clearing, so there was a chance others would want to set up there alongside us. Yeah, all right. You're probably right. It just seemed creepy through the camera is all. Like, whoever was there wanted to be unseen. Yeah, I can get jumpy. Didn't mean to bring the mood down. I moved over to my tent bag and started unzipping and getting it all set up. As the sun would set in a few hours, we would have liked to have the fire pit done before then. Well, after a few hours, we had our tent set and a fire built with some nice rocks and fine tinder wood. We pulled out our sleeping bags and set them near the fire. Kind of an old tradition we'd always done. We took our sleeping bags out of the tents and set them around the fire so we could sit on them and tell stories around the fire. Always a lot of fun. So, have you decided if you want to start? Or shall I? He said, while opening a pack of hot dogs and setting them down on the little metal grate we'd set over the fire. You know I'm going to go first. I want this story to be unable to be topped so we can have an early night for the hike tomorrow. You know, when you give up against my superior storytelling skills, I said with a cheeky grin plastered on my face. Someone's confident tonight. We shall see, Mr. Master Storyteller. And he looked over at me, expectantly. The night was filled with laughs and some drinks and some hot dogs. We shared many stories and ran much later into the night than we'd originally intended. Bro, it's 2 a.m., I said with a soft giggle that was mostly due to the alcohol. Wait, you for real? We're in the Glasshouse frickin' Mountains. If it's past midnight, why do I not hear any insect songs? He glared at me as if I was trying to kill the fun, just to get some early sleep. But then, as I listened, there wasn't a single sound. It was most unnerving. I tried to brush it off as just my overactive imagination and showed him the time on my phone. We both took our sleeping bags back to their respective tents and bedded down for the night. Well, after what must have only been a few minutes, I was jolted awake by the sound of a gurgling, choking sound a very violent sound. I could hear a commotion, a lot of movement on the other side of the fire, where Detra had set his tent. I got up and unzipped my tent as fast as I could, having no idea what was going on. But I am a certified first responder, and whatever was going on sounded bad. So in my panic to get to Detra, I was out of the tent before I'd even fully unzipped it, then running around the fire, which was quite low, towards his tent. The first thing I noticed was the blood. So much blood. His tent looked like its entire bottom was coated in a thin layer of it. The tent itself was torn up badly, and the sleeping bag had massive lacerations, and was in ribbons. But Detra, he was nowhere to be seen. My heart was pumping in my ears. I tried to listen for that choking sound. I had to find him, but all I was met with was absolute silence. All I could hear was my heart in my ears and my ragged, quick breaths. D, where are you, man? Make some noise or something. I'm freaking out. If this is some kind of joke, I swear. But my words caught in my throat as I was scanning with my phone's flashlight, trying to find him, when the beam landed on a tree, with a red substance leaking down the bark, moving the light slowly up. Not sure what to expect, but knowing it couldn't mean anything good. The beam landed on Detra's upside-down, twisted face, mouth agape, glassy-looking eyes. My brain was near shutdown. I couldn't believe or even understand what I was looking at. The beam revealed more as I moved it around. He'd been impaled through the neck up on the tree, but he was also impaled in his chest and his pelvic region. I stumbled back, flicking my light in every direction, feeling exposed and in danger. I felt the hot dogs we'd eaten earlier, trying to make a reappearance, but I did my best to keep it forced down. I checked my phone. Of course, no service. Such a cliché and yet not unexpected up in the mountains. I heard movement to my left, but by the time I could react and for my light to reach the spot, there was nothing. I could hear it all around, though, within the tree line. I could just never see it. It was playing with me. I felt like a deer stuck in a bear trap while wolves surrounded me. I decided to make a break from the tent, and as soon as I was inside, I heard it. Rapid, heavy footfalls heading straight for my tent. He unsheathed the machete that I kept in my bag for the lantana and held it out in front of me, bracing my arms, hoping against all odds. Well, with this thing's speed and its weight, if it collided with the tent, I'd impale it on the machete. Whatever that thing was, it slammed right into the tent, tearing through on impact, and I was met with a horrific sight. A mouth filled with so many teeth and jaws wide enough to fit my whole head inside, eyes as black as the void. I didn't see the rest of the creature because, as I'd hoped, it indeed impaled itself on the machete, but at a price. Basic physics. Its kinetic force was insane. On the impact, I felt my right wrist snap. But at that moment, I used it to lurch back out of the opening. Well, the creature seemed stunned momentarily, undoubtedly confused by the weapon lodged in its rib area. It wouldn't last long, and I knew it. So I ran as fast as I could, doing everything in my power to try and keep the light steady so as not to trip on anything along the path. I then heard it start its pursuit. I regretted looking back, for what I saw was an elongated head formed with a large canine-like face with straggly black hair falling from the top of its head. It was running on all fours and had the body of what I could only describe as unnatural, like some kind of man and dog-like monstrosity. Its features, well, it was like some kind of fucked-up dingo. but it was so much larger, and it instilled total fear in me. Once my mind had fully registered what I was looking at, my flight response went into overdrive. The level of fear and adrenaline I felt was insane. A hike that had taken us closer to 2 hours took me less than 50 minutes to get back down to the parking area. I jumped inside Detra's car and pulled out as fast as I could. I was doing well over any speed limit in the area, but I didn't care. Well, that was 8 years ago. Much has happened since then. But Dee's body was never recovered. And even though I've reached out to anyone who would listen, I don't care how crazy I sound, because something needs to be done. Somebody needs to do something. That thing needs to die. But I've given up any hope of people listening. So now I write this. Once this is published, I'm going into those mountains. I'm going to find that son of a bitch and put it down myself. Or die trying. And that's where this post comes in. If you're reading this, I'm dead. I failed. I had this set to auto-publish exactly 7 days from writing this. If I'd succeeded, I would have stopped that post, as the job would have been done. So it's your turn now. Please spread the message. Or better still, take the fight to those mountains in any form you can and beat that thing. I should have stayed home. We all should have stayed home. The Statement of Alexander Rybnik, March 15th, 1937. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It wasn't about making history or to stand on the shoulders of giants. It was about knowledge and truth. I needed to know what happened to my grandfather. I needed to know what he'd discovered. I needed to see what he saw with his own eyes and come to an understanding. Oh, the mundanity and pointlessness of life finally sent me on my way. My friend, Captain Peasley, would take me on my quest. We travelled the ocean on the captain's fishing trawler, the Southern Crux. We were to make landfall at Cooktown, a coastal town in the Shire of Cook, Queensland, Australia. Now, before he died, my grandfather was a university lecturer who taught archaeology. I followed in his footsteps. In his will, he left me a key to a safety deposit box at his bank. To my surprise, the box contained several books on the occult and mysticism, and numerous maps. But the most significant items in the box were a pair of sketches and a curious black stone with a face of sorts carved into it. In my grandfather's letter, he stated that the drawings were inspired by strange dreams that had been plaguing him. I examined the sketches. A subterranean cavern of immense height was meticulously drawn on paper with black pencil. The centerpiece of this sketch were 2 rows of standing stones that ran parallel to one another. They were built from massive cyclopean rocks that were stacked in such a way that was reminiscent of Stonehenge. The image evoked fleeting thoughts of eldritch terror. Written on the backside of the drawing, "The gateway to the other side resides within the mountain." The second drawing was even more bizarre. I got the distinct impression that it was a cold and arid desert at night. The ground was fissured and littered with fields of mummified human remains. The focus of this image, however, was that of an enormous plateau which stood menacingly. On the surface of the plateau was also a collection of standing stones similar to the first. An indistinct shape stood on the edge of the plateau, an animal, I think. Written on the opposite side of the paper was a message. "The fabled plateau of Leng. Each and every single one of us will face this. It is inevitable." The stone carving came from a time when we knew very little and feared the primal world. A modern mind wouldn't find it difficult to visualize the world through the eyes of ancient man. The face on the stone, however, instilled an instinctive fear of the dark. My destination was a site held sacred by Australian Aborigines where humans feel unwanted, where they vanish without trace. A place that is rugged and foreboding, clouded in mystery and immersed in superstition. Black Mountain. Aboriginals refer to it as the Mountain of Death. Tunnels and caves honeycomb the area. The only living things on the mountain are giant spiders, pythons, and taipans. Thousands upon thousands of gigantic boulders strewn across the landscape make up the mountain, a treacherous, barren waste. Scientists have offered theories behind the origin of this peculiar mountain. A volcanic eruption, an upheaval during the Ice Age, an asteroid impact site. But none of these possibilities seem satisfactory. I stood at the bow of the ship, gazing at the continent that loomed on the horizon. My guide, Tommy, approached. "Oh, I think you're as mad as a bag of ferrets." "Tell me your tale," I said. Tommy leaned on the railing next to me. "My people have many beliefs on how the mountain came to be." "Go on," I said as I withdrew a pack of cigarettes from my shirt pocket. I offered Tommy a cigarette. He declined. I lit up as he began. One such legend says, in the dreaming, the time when legends were born, there was a beautiful young woman whose skin shone like obsidian. Two brothers were smitten by the woman. Both were determined to win her heart. Our attention was directed upwards towards the heavens. A faint ghostly band of red light materialized in the pre-dawn sky, directly above us. It was the Aurora Australis, the so-called Southern Lights. Tommy continued sharing his tale. To settle their differences, each brother set out to build a mountain of boulders. The brother with the highest mound would take the woman. Day after day, the brothers worked. Their piles of boulders grew taller and taller. Tommy paused and focused on the aurora. The glowing ribbons of red light spread across the dark sky as it brightened with intensity. The rippling lights continued to dance across the backdrop of luminous stars. Before the contest could be decided, a wild storm descended on the land. Boulders tumbled down and crushed both brothers. The woman died too. "Do you believe it's haunted?" They say her cries can be heard throughout the canyons and caves of the mountain. The place is cursed. At dusk, the evil of the place begins to reveal itself. You can hear it on the wind that blows in the endless caverns that run deep into the earth. It's a moaning wind that lures unsuspecting people to their doom. I grabbed my kit bag and withdrew the black stone with the carving on it. I presented it to Tommy. My grandfather found this in the mountain. Does it look familiar to you?" Tommy stared at the stone a good while. He traced a finger over the lines that formed the face. "No, this does not resemble anything that I've ever seen." "You say you found it in the mountain?" "Yes, in a subterranean chamber." It's very strange. Shortly afterwards, we docked at a fisherman's wharf just outside Cooktown. I booked a room at a nearby inn. Peasley would stay with the ship. During the day, we would go into town and stock up on supplies. While I was chatting with the innkeeper, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A person sitting on a bench directly across the inn. Underneath a street lamp was an elderly tribal man. He had a very distinct look that is seared into my memory. He had winter white hair and a beard that was long and unkempt. He was wearing a dusty old suit which seemed to be slightly frayed. I think the most unsettling thing about him was his gaze. Well, I wrote him off as a drunkard before checking in. Now, before departing to my room, I took one more glance at the old man, only to see that he was gone. Little did I know that this was a sign of things to come. And after a long voyage, sleep came easily. The following day, I sat down with one of the tribal elders at a local pub. I enjoyed a pleasant conversation over drink and food. He explained a belief among his people in the area. The tribal elder began telling me some of the beliefs of his people. The mountain is of important significance to the tribe. Kalkajaka is what we call it, the place of spears. The tribal elder paused to take a sip of his drink. His eyes scanned the room. He seemed suspicious of something. The mountain originated in the dream time with an evil medicine man who convened with wicked spirits from beyond. A young chief confronted him about this and was murdered by the medicine man. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. But it didn't stop there. The cruel medicine man went on to devour the flesh of the chief and drank his blood. The tribe became aware of this and chased the man out with burning vengeance in their hearts. He fled into the mountain, where he was then struck by a cleansing bolt of lightning. His body exploded and in turn charred the surrounding rocks. The tribal elder stopped again. I could see his eyes focused on someone behind me. He focused on me again and continued. It is a place that demands respect. But the white man has often disregarded the legends. In 1877, a courier was horseback riding, searching for a stray calf, when he, the horse, and calf all disappeared. Several years later, a constable was hot on the heels of a wanted man. He was tracking the criminal through the bush at the base of the mountain. They both seemingly vanished into thin air. Other trackers followed the trail to a cave entrance, but came up completely empty-handed. Despite the unrelenting heat, I could feel a chill course through my body, like someone had walked over my grave. The tribal elder saw me shiver, and a grim look formed on his face. The disappearances have occurred ever since. Nearby cattle ranchers and their herds have gone without trace. Gold prospectors and cave explorers have all inexplicably disappeared into the ether. Human remains have been found in the vicinity of the mountain, their bodies cut to ribbons. But the most shocking thing about these grisly finds is that each of the individuals have had their skulls cracked open and their brains removed, possibly devoured. The tribal elder paused when he saw the color drain from my face. My grandfather was killed by someone in a very similar fashion while he was seeking treatment in Canberra. There are many predatory animals in Australia, but none of them are known to have these particular habits. Rumors of a killer stalking the countryside run rampant. The police have been working overtime on this. My heart sank into my stomach. But what about this phantom cat I've heard about? The tribal elder took another long sip from his drink before continuing. There have been rumblings of a large, mysterious black cat that has been sighted on the mountain. Maybe it's a surviving relative of Thylacio carnifex, which was Australia's largest marsupial carnivore. This is an especially curious claim because there are no terrestrial cats on the continent. Domestic cats were introduced by colonists in 1804, and there are large wild cats that live in public zoos in the capital city, but none that live in the wilderness. Another pause between the two of us. We were both scanning the room now. I think I could confidently say we both felt like something was wrong. A shift in the conversation. I showed the black stone to the tribal elder, as well as the drawings created by my grandfather. He examined each one carefully and shook his head. A look of worry formed on his face. How did your grandfather die? The tribal elder asked. He was murdered. My condolences to you. May I ask how he was before he died? Oh, he looked like a man who was pursued. He was always looking over his shoulder. He shut himself away from the world. The tribal elder let out a sigh. Maybe he saw things he shouldn't have. Maybe he took things he shouldn't have touched. There was a long silence between the two of us as we looked down at our drinks. We were both pondering things. I happened to glance up and briefly caught sight of an old tribal man with a striking white beard and wild hair. He was dressed in a dishevelled suit that looked like it came from another period, and he was fixated on me. He slowly raised a hand and pointed a finger directly at me. I blinked. The man was gone. The tribal elder broke the silence. Maybe it would be best to return the stone to its rightful place. I spent some time at the library. I'm not sure what to make of this. Excerpts from A Doomed Expedition. In 1850, a French explorer, Axel Guillemot, set out to explore Bag Mountain. The expedition consisted of 4 other Europeans, 2 Aboriginal guides, and 7 horses. They were never seen or heard from again. Only the remains of one of the guides was discovered. Their camp was found at the base of the mountain. It's believed they perished on the mountain. Subsequent search parties turned up nothing. There are photographs of each member of the expedition. The photographs were taken at a local church in Cooktown. One photograph in particular has put a strain on my nerves. It is one of the guides. An old man with a white head of hair and a grey beard. He was wearing a dark frock coat over light trousers and low-heel shoes. The name under the photograph, Clifford Bomba. Not much is known of his youth, but his skills in tracking and knowledge of Aboriginal language suggest a traditional upbringing. His skills in horse riding and marksmanship indicated extensive contact with colonial culture. He was serving as a native assistant in the police force at Cooktown, where his tasks were to assist in tracking of escaped convicts who were wanted by the authorities. He had a reputation as a superb tracker, and a reliable and useful member of any travelling party. The mutilated remains of Clifford Bombat were discovered on the outskirts of their camp. Possible animal attack. The most significant wound was done to his head. The trek through the forest of eucalyptus trees was long and arduous. A thick fog bank swallowed the landscape. It suffocated the environment in its omnipresence. The looming mountain was a ghostly silhouette in a thick white veil. Fortunately, we were not far from the base of the mountain when the worst of it arrived. Maybe it was my imagination, but I could have sworn I saw a spectral shape moving in the fog. And a feeling of dread began to squeeze my heart. "I don't think we're alone," I whispered to Tom. "I know." Tommy reached into his rucksack and withdrew an M1 911 pistol. He looked at me. "You know how to use firearms?" I nodded. Tommy handed the gun over to me and withdrew a second handgun. He stuck it in his belt. "There are 2 huge pythons that live in the mountain, big enough to swallow a fully grown kangaroo." Tommy and I set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by tall grass. We would wait for the fog to dissipate before moving on, but in the meantime, we examined my grandfather's maps. It was unusually quiet. The surrounding area was completely mute, save for the sound of a gentle breeze. Can't help but feel eyes on both of us. In a dream, I was standing in a dark hallway at night. My grandfather's home in Poland. At the end of the hall was a door that was partially open. Dim orange light seeped through the minute openings. I approached the door with great trepidation in my heart. I summoned whatever courage I had and nudged the door open. A slow, painful creak sounded as the door gently swung open. It was my grandfather's study. A lone figure stood at the desk. It was my grandfather. A look of sorrow and regret was etched on his face. He reached into the desk and withdrew the black stone. He held it in his hand and extended his arm towards me. His lips were moving as though he was speaking, but no words came out. Something materialized behind my grandfather. An apparition. It was Clifford Bombat. His gaze was piercing my soul. And then something happened. His form began to change. He fell to the floor as a thrashing mass of shadows. A giant cat emerged from the dark. Its coat was inky black that refused to reflect any light. The beast was unlike any cat species I was familiar with. I could say its sleek body shape was similar to that of a cheetah, but its head was shaped like that of a jaguar with powerful jaws. I think its eyes were the worst. Both pupils were completely dilated. They were both ringed by luminescent irises that gave off a strange white light. They reminded me of a solar eclipse at totality. It bared its teeth, revealing rows of sharp teeth that dripped with saliva. A low, rumbling growl sounded from its throat. Its jaws unhinged and something erupted from its maw. Serpent. Tentacle. It was a muscular appendage that extruded towards me. It was the cat's esophagus and stomach turned inside out. At the edge of the gut sac was a bony lance of sorts. It punctured my skull and I collapsed to the floor. Several smaller tendrils emerged from the beast's throat and lashed out towards me. They entered the bleeding gash in my skull and began to pry it open. And then the room went black. I awoke to a late-night thunderstorm. I was gripping the stone with a face carved onto it. It was a tough scramble up the mound of gigantic black boulders that formed Black Mountain. We had the benefit of my grandfather's maps that showed us the path to take. He was very meticulous about detailing the location. The cave entrance was on the summit of the mountain. In order to access it, we had to get down on our bellies and push all the air out of our lungs in order to squeeze through a narrow gap. Once we got through the squeeze, we were able to stand upright. Next was a downward sloping tunnel. The sunlight lessened in here, so we readied our electric torches. The further we traversed the tunnel, the darker it became. At the end of the passage was a straight drop down. Tommy grabbed the climbing ropes from his rucksack and secured them, which would allow us to climb down the shaft. And then it happened. Heavy footfalls sounded behind us. A black silhouette knocked Tommy face first against the cavern wall. In the light from my electric torch, a massive feline was revealed. It swiped its claws at me just inches from my midsection. I could see pure animal rage in its eyes. It let out an ear-deafening roar that rippled through the passage. It was the phantom cat from my dream. But this was no dream. This was real. In a desperate panic, I withdrew the pistol from my kit bag and fired several times at the beast. The tunnel lit up from each shot. The deafening rounds punched holes into its hide. But the cat didn't even flinch. A guttural rumble sounded from deep within its throat. The cat opened its mouth, showing off rows of razor-sharp teeth. A muscular and flexible protuberance emerged from its throat, just like in my dream. It was the animal's stomach and esophagus, turning inside out and repurposed into a tentacle of sorts. A bony claw protruded from the very tip of the tentacle. The tentacle reeled back like a snake getting ready to strike. It launched towards me and struck the ground just inches from my feet. It did this several times, forcing me backward each time. I kept backing up in complete and utter terror until I found myself falling. Darkness. When I came to, I found myself at the bottom of the shaft. I was in a state of shock. Agony. Despair. Horror. I detected movement coming from up above me. I grabbed my electric torch, which had survived the fall, and shone it upwards. A face was peering down at me. My grandfather! I cried out. I painfully retreated into the dark passage behind me, my heart noisily beating against my ribcage. My lungs felt like there was fire in them. I came to a complete stop at the end of the passage. My mind was trying to process everything that had happened. Primordial masonry stood in front of me, a wall composed of cyclopean stones. Perhaps it was a structure built by the ancients. It had to be. Oddly enough, a single block was missing. It was a way through, and I squeezed my way through silently, praying that the whole thing would not collapse onto me. I clumsily emerged into a chamber beyond the cyclopean wall. Spikes of pain shot through my back, reminding me of my great fall. I gasped in pain. My gasp had drawn the attention of something. Something big. Something hungry. The sound of something dragging through the loose rocks on the chamber floor. A massive creature slithered towards me. A cylindrical, limbless body moved into my light. Glistening scales, an arrow-shaped head, 2 yellow eyes fixed on me, a large, fanged mouth. A giant python was moving towards me with predatory intent. I raised the pistol and fired twice into its head, putting it down instantly. The recoil of the pistol started making my hands feel numb. I instinctively turned around and saw a shadow figure standing back at the cyclopean wall. I shakily pointed the pistol and torch at the apparition, but to my dismay, the shape seemingly ate the light. It was darker than blackness. It didn't strike. It just stood there staring at me with creeping brutality. I started singing a lullaby to myself. When the blazing sun is gone, when nothing shines upon, then you show your little light. Twinkle, twinkle, all the night. By this point, I was on the other side of madness, a descent to the inferno. Then the traveller in the dark thanks you for your tiny spark. How could he see where to go if you did not twinkle so? Tears welled up in my eyes. My heart was overworking itself now. In the dead silence of the nameless ruins, I could hear hell's churn in my ears. My breath was stolen. I fled. After ploughing through an untold distance of Stygian depths, I found myself standing in an enormous cavern. The limits of the chamber were farther away than any eye could see. The inky darkness proved impenetrable from my flimsy torch. I halted my mad dash. It was freezing cold down here, a stark contrast to the surface climate. I could see the vapors of my breath in the light. My teeth began to chatter as I started to shiver. A twilight mist began to slowly drift up from the cavern floor. 2 rows of gigantic standing stones towered over me. It was a prehistoric monument of nebulous origin. It was much larger than Stonehenge. These were the ruins my grandfather had sketched on paper. I gazed up at the monoliths. Each of them had unidentifiable glyphs etched into them. What they were supposed to represent remains unknown. But horrible suggestions and primordial fear is what came to mind. The curious altar between the first 2 monoliths caught my attention. Dark stains discolored the top with rivulets on the sides. Movement behind me. I turned around only to come face to face with my grandfather. I found myself being lifted up off the ground. I kicked and thrashed helplessly. Next, I found myself being flung towards the altar. I landed on my back, having the wind knocked out of me a second time. I groggily got up and saw my grandfather pointing at me. By now, the twilight mist became waist-high, and the temperature in the cavern continued to drop. I realized my grandfather wasn't pointing at me, but at the altar behind me. I knew what had to be done. I nervously reached a hand into my kit bag and pulled out the black stone with a face carved onto it. I gently placed the rock onto the altar. I felt an electrical sensation travel throughout my body. There was a smell in the air like that of a thunderstorm. The mist started to dissipate, and the temperature began to warm. And a loud eruption startled me, and everything went black. I remember flashes of consciousness, dark passages and cave tunnels, the sensation of being dragged, and a voice, Tommy's voice. "You're going to be okay, mate. Just a little further." I looked up and saw Tommy's face, but there was something different about him. His eyes. They reminded me of a total solar eclipse. And I faded out. When I finally came to, I found myself in the Cooktown Hospital. I know the truth about Black Mountain. I know about the dark and forbidden secrets that are hidden within. I put things right and re-established the balance, and I think I've been forgiven. However, the Mountain of Death, the place of the spear, will forever remain in my dreams. Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know about the pandemic. It's pretty horrifying and still early days, with ample time to get much worse. Forget all that. I stumbled upon something much more sinister. There's a cult using the illness and community angst as a smokescreen. Read on and I'll tell you what I saw. Now, if I was in your shoes, I'd be wondering a few things. Who is this guy? Is there any proof? And why tell me and not the authorities? Firstly, I'm a nobody. I have no background in cults, no fancy university degrees, no stints in the army or emergency services. Just a regular Joe Schmo. Obviously, I'm not handing out my name or any details that might lead back to me. Posting this account is dangerous enough, and I really want to live. That leaves a question of proof, and I'm afraid I have jack shit of that too. Just a picture taken on my phone, itself several generations old with craptastic zooming functions. It could probably be debunked with the right gear and determination, so you'll just have to decide for yourself if I'm right or wrong. As for the authorities, there's not a lot of trust in them under this government. I've given them the same chance as you, but I doubt they'll listen to reason. These are the guys who deny climate change, abuse their office for partisan games, and practice their own version of fake news. Yeah, they'll act when the shit hits the fan and claim ignorance after the fact. The way I see it, if my account goes viral or gets noticed by the right people, maybe the fan won't get too shitty. Well, time to get into it. Down here in Oz, we've been running short of goods in our supermarkets, chemists and other related shops. Toilet paper, aka dunny rolls, were the first thing to fly off the shelves, and you've probably seen or heard a few memes about it. Well, some are pretty funny, I'll give you that. Hand sanitizer was also quickly snatched up, and that also figures into my account. Canned goods, pasta, noodles, they're starting to go, but it's not really relevant here. Well, the thing about dunny rolls is that they take up a lot of space, so the shops don't keep a whole lot of them in reserve. It takes time to ship things from warehouses to supermarket shelves, and most of us are pretty dispersed these days, well, except for the city people. Lots of little supermarkets are tucked into the suburbs, so that's a ton of stores to share stock with. Beyond that, who knows how well the supply system is. When the Prime Minister says it's all fine, I'm not exactly filled with confidence. Yeah, this is the man who holidayed overseas while bushfires raged back at home. I'll give more credence to the experts. It was in a supermarket that I first got tangled up in this cult bullshit. Since they have surveillance, I'm not going to tell you which supermarket or where it was. Yeah, like I said earlier, I want to live, and that means staying anonymous. I was accompanying an old relative, well, my dad, basically doing the driving and the carrying. And yes, we were after some dunny rolls, along with 12 other items. It was flying off the shelves fast, and I noticed a group of people swooping in with empty trolleys. Yep, they had nothing else save a single bottle of hand sanitizer. The one good per person restriction had just come into effect. So seeing my chance, I scooped up the last pack of dunny rolls and beat a hasty retreat out of that aisle. My dad chuckled at our fortune and called me a good boy. Well, I must admit I did like the praise because I don't get much of it from the old man. The group of hand sanitizer shoppers gave me the evil eye, and one of them even shadowed us for the rest of our shopping trip. He was a middle-aged man, nothing special to look at, and dressed in some pretty sad attire. If it came down to a fight, I'd favor my chances over him. Still, I didn't dare leave my trolley unattended for a second. There was something off about him, and his unassuming friends too. I was glad to pay for our goods and leave. Well, skipping ahead, Dad and myself returned home to his retirement village. Usually there were organized buses to take the residents out to the shops, but with things as they are, I felt I had the need to help out before things got worse. We had a beer and just talked about the hell this country was heading into. Dad said he'd never seen anything like this, save for the real bad natural disasters of the past. I told him not to worry, but to be careful. Older people seem more vulnerable to the pandemic, and I wasn't sure how much longer I'd be able to visit him. Lockdowns were being considered. I'd just have to call him on the phone if it came down to that. Well, a little while later, his phone actually did ring. I didn't catch who was on the other end of the line, but my dad was annoyed. When I asked him about it, he said that someone wanted to buy the toilet paper off him for double its price. I got worried. How the hell did anyone know he'd just got some? None of the other residents were outside, mostly because it was safer to be indoors. And before I left, I made my dad promise to lock the door and refuse contact with any more weirdos. A few days later, I got the news that nobody wants to hear. Dad was gone. This man had shaped my life, and I'd never really gotten the chance to thank him for it, not properly. I just sat through the phone call, too wrapped up in my grief and the mountain of things I'd have to do. But I dragged myself back out to the retirement village before he could be taken away. Oh, even if Dad wasn't truly with us, I wanted to see him in the flesh. Plus, I knew the old bastard would want me watching over his things. The village staff were pretty good to me. Death was something they trained for. I filled out a form or two, made sure the old man kept his dignity, and called the relatives with the bad news. I also checked Dad's unit to remove any perishable food, clean up the place, and prepare for the removal of his personal effects. I'd need to come back with boxes for that, when I could muster the will. Oh, and the dunny rolls were gone. All of them. A sinking feeling hit me. When I asked around, one of my dad's neighbors said that they'd seen a man leave the unit with the toilet paper hours before I got the call. Sure as shit, the description fit that of the creepy supermarket shopper. Well, they said my dad died of natural causes. I really wanted some more tests done, but the rest of Dad's family didn't go for it. I could have kicked up a stink, but even I wasn't sure if I was thinking straight. Instead, I decided to return to the supermarket and find those creepy shoppers. It was a way to dodge things and cope with Dad's passing. Would getting back some dunny rolls really make a difference? Well, probably not. It was purely by chance that I saw the same group. I practiced a macho-sounding speech and considered recording it all on my phone. But when I saw them again, my courage just seemed to slip away. This time they had paper towels and disinfectant in their trolleys. I decided that it was too public for a confrontation and waited outside to tell them. The group had a minivan, which aren't all that common around here, and so following them was easy. Took down their rego plate, but well, with our current privacy laws, it wouldn't do me any good, unless I went to the cops. If I caught these guys up to no good, maybe then I could use it. I drove past the van as it pulled into a long driveway and found a place to park my own car, out of sight. The property was sizable but pretty run down. If these guys turned out to be drug dealers, I wouldn't have been surprised. Of course, if they were dealers, it'd be even more dangerous to confront them. Well, I'd try to be careful. With all the junk and foliage, keeping out of sight looked doable. I crept closer to the house, avoiding windows and listening in to see how many people were there. The TV was pretty loud and I snuck a peek into the living room. Nobody was there. More creeping around followed, and I hoped to hell they didn't have a dog out here. Eventually I tracked the group to a shed. It was a bit rusted, but more or less intact. It also had a padlock on the door, but it wasn't currently locked. Well, I couldn't see the group yet, but I heard noises and voices. Something like a chant. It was foreign, maybe Arabic, not that I know. I didn't even watch SBS. The urge to leave was damn enticing. In the end, I decided to hide in the yard and sneak a peek at that shed after the freaky people went back to the house. There was a really odd smell coming from a pile of compost, and I swear it had huge worms in it. Well, I'm no animal expert, but do green worms of that size even exist? Nearby bins were overflowing with empty dunny rolls. It took almost an hour of waiting, but I got my chance to see what they were hiding. Jesus, it was something to see. Stacked within the shed were mummified bodies, at least 50 plus. The bottom ones were wrapped with some sort of linen and smelled oily. But closer to the top of the stack, the bodies were wrapped in torn bedsheets and smelled of sanitizer. There was a ton of discarded toilet rolls in a barrel, again with that oily smell. So presumably they'd been using those too. Well, I highly doubt it was used to wipe you-know-what, anyway. I took a quick picture on my phone of the mummies, since the video would drain my battery like nobody's business, and come out pretty shit. I also had to hide behind the pile of mummies to avoid detection. One of the creepy people dropped off more supplies to the shed. I swear that some of the mummified bodies twitched in response to my proximity. God, were they alive? Or was there something in them? After the cultist had gone, I booked it out of there, before someone decided to lock the shed. Well, screw getting my dad's dunny rolls back. Storing corpses without a license was surely something I could go to the cops with, but I opted to send them a letter instead. It contained a printed page of my findings and a copy of the mummy photo. Well, I didn't go back to the place and tried to get on with life. Dad had a funeral, thankfully a cremation, and then began the fun process of inheritance and sharing out his things. Well, I did keep half an eye on the news, and I saw nothing about the cult. I looked up some mummification information on the web, but what I saw doesn't completely gel with it. And those green worms, well, I didn't find anything that matched them either. Clearly the cult was up to something different. Well, I could make shit up, link it to the pandemic maybe, but that'd just need pulling your chain. God, I strongly considered returning there with a can of petrol to burn the contents of that shed into ash. But of course, I chickened out. It'd just be me versus half a dozen crazies. And what if I made things worse? No. Best course of action is to spread the word. Well, maybe you're disappointed in me. If so, that's a fair cop. But if someone strange offers to buy you your dunny rolls, well, I'd take the deal, just to be safe. So 3 stories for you this evening, vaguely on an Australian theme. Well, not even vaguely, they're all set in Australia, and that's good enough for me. Hope you enjoyed those 3. Relax in the sounds of the pouring rain. Oh, yes, nothing quite like it on a lovely, dark evening. Well, maybe not the time of year for most of us to have pouring rain, but hey, just felt like it this evening. So, there you go. Alright, so yeah, that's enough for me for this evening. Back again on Sunday. Promised you another episode of Operation Apple Tree, and it's going to be a big one. At least an hour more coming up on Sunday. So until then, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye.